My dear Emily, won't you try the ice cream I made especially for you? My Aunt Margaret asked, her smile not quite matching the intensity in her eyes. Her voice dripped with sweetness that felt as artificial as store-bought syrup. I was sitting at an ornate wrought iron table in my aunt's extravagant backyard in Boston, surrounded by perfectly manicured flower beds and a bubbling fountain that seemed to whisper warnings. The family had gathered for our monthly get-together, this one supposedly celebrating my recent promotion at work. My aunt handed me a bowl of ice cream with an unusual bluish tint. "Try it. I made it just for you," she said, watching me with an expectancy that made my skin crawl. The dessert in front of me was melting too fast for something just out of the freezer, and there was a strange shimmering quality to it that made my stomach knot with suspicion. My name is Emily Chen, and at 25, I never imagined I'd be questioning whether my own aunt was trying to poison me. But after countless coincidental bouts of mysterious illness following family gatherings, I had learned to be cautious, especially around Aunt Margaret. She had a talent for creating situations that left me sick or embarrassed, always with that same eager smile she was wearing now. "How thoughtful of you, Aunt Margaret," I replied, forcing my lips into a grateful smile while my mind screamed warnings. I noticed my brother David watching our interaction carefully from across the lawn, his lawyer's eyes missing nothing. However, right after that, his mobile phone rang, and he answered with a frown. A few minutes later, he approached me with an apologetic expression and said, "It's an urgent call from a client. I'll be back soon," before leaving. The ice cream was melting at an alarming rate, creating an oily puddle in the bowl. The sight reminded me of last month when I'd ended up in emergency care after eating a special family recipe dessert at Margaret's house. The doctors couldn't explain my symptoms, and my aunt had insisted she'd made it the same way for everyone else. Sophia, my cousin and Margaret's daughter, watched me intently from the other side of the table, absently toying with her own untouched bowl of ice cream, a different flavor from mine, I noticed. "Mom has been taking culinary classes," Sophia said with a practiced smile. "She's been experimenting with new recipes just for you." The way she emphasized, "for you," sent a chill down my spine despite the summer heat. I had noticed Margaret spending more time researching online lately, claiming she was looking into family heritage recipes. But something felt wrong, the hushed conversations between her and Sophia that stopped when I entered the room, the strange ingredients I'd glimpsed in her pantry, and now this ice cream with its peculiar appearance. I lifted the spoon, pretending to take a bite while carefully studying their expressions. Margaret and Sophia exchanged a quick glance that confirmed my worst fears. Making a show of checking my phone, I stood up abruptly. "Oh. I need to take this call about the Henderson account. Aunt Margaret, would you mind if I use your study?" As I walked past Sophia's place setting, I deliberately stumbled, quickly switching our ice cream bowls in the confusion of steadying myself. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up. "I've always been so clumsy." Sophia waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to knock anything else over." I nodded and hurried away, my heart hammering against my ribs. From the patio doors, I could still see them at the table. Now I just had to wait and watch. From the doorway, I watched as Sophia lifted her spoon to her mouth, and my stomach twisted with anxiety. Part of me wanted to stop her, to warn her, but I needed proof. I'd spent too many nights in emergency rooms, too many hours doubled over in pain, always after eating something prepared by my aunt. It wasn't always this way. When I first moved to Boston after college to start my career, Aunt Margaret had seemed genuinely supportive, inviting me to family gatherings and helping me find an apartment. But looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs, how she would accidentally spill drinks on my outfit before important presentations, or how my food always tasted strangely bitter when she offered to add some seasoning. The incident started small, an upset stomach here, a mild allergic reaction there. My aunt always had an explanation ready. "Maybe it was something you ate earlier," or there must be a stomach bug going around. But the pattern was becoming painfully clear. The worst episode was 2 months ago when I ended up hospitalized after Sunday dinner at their house. The doctors found unusual compounds in my blood work they couldn't identify, but Aunt Margaret convinced everyone I must have accidentally taken the wrong medication. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, watching as Sophia took a bite of the ice cream. Margaret was scrolling through her phone, pretending to be unconcerned. The untouched bowl in front of Sophia, originally mine, sat on the table, the blue tint now more pronounced as it melted completely. A slight tremor in Sophia's hand caught my attention. She set down her spoon, her face suddenly drained of color. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong." Aunt Margaret looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she realized which bowl her daughter was eating from. She jumped up, knocking over her iced tea. "Sophia, what's happening?" Sophia's hands were trembling violently now. "I feel." She tried to stand but stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support. "Mom, what did you put in that ice cream?" I stepped onto the patio, my phone already recording. Margaret was beside Sophia now, her face ashen. "That wasn't supposed to be your bowl," she whispered. But in the quiet afternoon air, her words carried clearly across the patio. Sophia's eyes widened with realization and fear as she stared at the ice cream, which had started bubbling strangely in the bowl. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, sliding to the ground. "Please." I dialed 911 immediately, my hand steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. Sophia was on the patio stones now, her body shaking with violent tremors. Margaret knelt beside her, panic written across her face as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. "Yes, we need an ambulance at 278 Beacon Hill Avenue," I said clearly, keeping my phone recording with my other hand. "My cousin appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her food. She's conscious but experiencing tremors." As I spoke to the dispatcher, Sophia's eyes locked onto mine. The usual competitiveness in her gaze was replaced by raw fear and betrayal. "Emily," she gasped, "you switched, you knew." "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured me. "Please stay on the line." Margaret was growing more frantic by the second. "Sophia, what's happening?" "That wasn't supposed to, it wasn't meant for." "Stop it, Mom." Sophia snapped through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily overcoming her distress. "This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the presentation next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." My blood ran cold. The Henderson presentation where I was scheduled to pitch my proposal for a major client account, the same account Sophia had been trying to land for months at our competing agencies. Everything started clicking into place like puzzle pieces, revealing a disturbing picture. "The special dessert last month," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "And the breakfast incident 2 months ago. Those weren't accidents at all, were they?" Sophia's face contorted with another wave of pain. "The dessert, that was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson pitch presentation. But you showed up anyway." She clutched her stomach, doubling over on the patio stones. "Mom said, she said we just needed to discredit you, make clients think you were unreliable and unprofessional." The wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached the house. Aunt Margaret stood up, backing away from both of us, her designer sandals scraping against the stone patio. "Sophia, stop talking right now. You don't know what you're saying." Her voice cracked with panic. "I know exactly what I'm saying," Sophia shot back, her words slurring slightly as the tremors intensified. "We've been planning this for months, ever since Emily started outperforming me at every client meeting and got that promotion I was supposed to get. You were supposed to make sure she ate the ice cream today." The paramedics rushed through the garden gate, and I quickly stepped aside to let them work. As they loaded Sophia onto a stretcher, I stopped recording and sent the video to my private email, then to my brother David. Aunt Margaret stood frozen by the fountain, watching as her carefully constructed plan crumbled around her like the sandcastles we used to build as children. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I told the paramedics, my voice firm with newfound resolve. "After all, I need to make sure my cousin gets the proper treatment." I met my aunt's terrified gaze, her usually perfect makeup now streaked with tears. "And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that ice cream." The emergency room at Boston Medical Center was a chaotic blur of activity as doctors rushed to treat Sophia. I sat in the waiting area, my phone clutched in my hand, replaying the recording of Sophia's confession, the tremors in her voice, the panic in her eyes, the betrayal etched across her face. It was all the evidence I needed to prove this wasn't just paranoia on my part. "Family of Sophia Wang," a nurse called out, clipboard in hand. I stood up, noting Aunt Margaret's conspicuous absence. She'd mumbled something about getting Sophia's medical insurance information 20 minutes ago and hadn't returned. "I'm her cousin," I said, following the nurse through the double doors. My legs felt shaky, but my determination was steady. "How is she?" "She's stabilized, but we found concerning levels of unknown substances in her system." The nurse's expression was grave, her eyes compassionate. "Dr. Rivera would like to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." Dr. Rivera, a young woman with alert eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was waiting by Sophia's room, tablet in hand. "Ms. Chen, could you tell me exactly what happened before your cousin became ill?" Her gaze was direct, assessing. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment as I pulled out my phone. "I think you should listen to this first." I played the recording from the garden party, watching the doctor's expression change from professional concern to alarm as the evidence unfolded. "This is extremely serious," she said, her fingers flying across her tablet as she made notes. "The substance we found isn't something that accidentally ends up in ice cream. We're looking at deliberate contamination with intent to harm." Just then, Aunt Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway, her face pale and sweaty, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head. She'd clearly overheard the doctor's words. "Emily," she started, taking a step toward me, her hand outstretched. "Please, let me explain, stay back," Dr. Rivera warned, immediately pressing the emergency call button on the wall. "Security to room 218, please." Aunt Margaret raised her hands in surrender, her diamond bracelets catching the fluorescent light. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding." Sophia was confused from the heat. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" I pulled up the texts I'd discovered on Sophia's phone last week, the ones I'd secretly forwarded to myself after borrowing her phone to make a call when mine was dead. "So these messages between you and Sophia about making sure she's out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just casual family chit-chat?" The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive blush looking garish against her pallor. "You went through her phone? After I found the strange chemical recipes in your study bookshelf?" "Yes, I did." My voice was steady, empowered by truth. I turned to Dr. Rivera. "Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Sophia's system today." The doctor's eyes narrowed with professional suspicion. "We'll need to run some comparative tests. Security will make sure your aunt remains available for questioning." 2 security guards appeared, positioning themselves on either side of Aunt Margaret. She looked trapped, her carefully constructed facade of family matriarch crumbling before my eyes. "Sophia and I," she stammered, her manicured hands fluttering like trapped birds, "we were just trying to help you focus on family priorities. You were working too hard, taking all the opportunities that Sophia deserved." I thought if we could just make you take some time off, by poisoning me? My voice was steady even as my hands shook with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How long have you been doing this? Was it you who tampered with my food at the family Christmas party too when I spent the whole night sick in the bathroom? Aunt Margaret's silence was all the answer I needed. Through the doorway, I could see Sophia's room where she lay connected to various monitors, her designer outfit replaced by a hospital gown. Her earlier anger was gone, replaced by the fear of someone who knew their schemes had finally caught up with them. Detective Park is on her way, Dr. Rivera said quietly. She'll want to take statements from everyone involved. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no going back to pretending we were a normal, loving family. Detective Park arrived within the hour, her presence commanding attention in the sterile hospital corridor. She was a seasoned investigator who specialized in family violence cases, and she listened intently as I played the recording from the garden party and showed her the text messages. Ms. Chan, she said, reviewing her notes, her expression professional but sympathetic, you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents? I pulled out my phone again, opening a detailed document I'd been quietly maintaining for months, documenting every suspicious illness, every strange taste in food prepared by my aunt. The first time was in February after a dinner at Aunt Margaret's house. I had severe stomach pains and dizziness that came out of nowhere. The second was in April, the special dessert incident. And then in June after breakfast with them. My voice remained steady as I continued, drawing strength from finally being heard. Each time, the symptoms were similar but just different enough that the doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause. The detective's eyes narrowed as she examined my detailed log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. And you've been keeping these records ever since you noticed the pattern? I hesitated before pulling out another phone from my bag. I also started carrying a backup phone with a different number. I used it to record conversations when I was around them. I have several where Aunt Margaret and Sophia discuss their plans, though they're careful not to be explicit about details. In one of the recordings, Sophia's voice came through clearly. The Henderson account is worth millions, Mom. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough to keep her away. Aunt Margaret's response was equally damning. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation at all. Detective Park's expression hardened as she listened, her professional demeanor unable to mask her disgust. Through the glass window of Sophia's room, I could see my cousin was now awake, looking significantly less confident than she had at the garden party. The hospital is running comprehensive toxicology screens, the detective informed me, her voice low and serious. Dr. Rivera has already identified several substances that don't occur naturally in food or drinks. We'll need samples from your aunt's home as well. A commotion down the hallway caught our attention. Aunt Margaret was arguing with the security guards, her voice rising with desperate indignation. I need to speak with my niece, she demanded, her designer purse clutched tightly against her chest. Emily, please. You don't understand. We were trying to protect the family legacy. Detective Park stepped between us, her stance protective. Ms. Wang, you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditation in your communications. Premeditated? Aunt Margaret laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the sterile corridor. We were just trying to slow her down. She was taking opportunities meant for Sophia. The family business has always gone to the oldest child in each generation. Sophia said if we could just make Emily take some time off, by poisoning her? Detective Park's voice cut like a knife. That's not protection of family legacy, Ms. Wang. That's attempted murder. The color drained from my aunt's perfectly made-up face. Murder? No, that's absurd, We never intended to. Then what exactly did you mean to do? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady as anger and hurt collided inside me. When you put something in my ice cream today, what was supposed to happen? Aunt Margaret's silence spoke volumes. Behind her, I could see Sophia watching through her hospital room window, her face a mask of fear and calculation. I wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain away months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided attempt at preserving family tradition. We'll need both their phones and access to their computers, Detective Park told the security guards. And I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the complete toxicology results. Dr. Rivera entered Sophia's room with a tablet in hand, her expression grim as she reviewed the test results. Detective Park and I followed, while Aunt Margaret remained outside with the guards, her normally commanding presence diminished. Sophia tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, but the tremors hadn't completely subsided. Her expensive outfit had been replaced by a hospital gown, her carefully applied makeup smeared across her pale face. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several concerning substances, Dr. Rivera announced, her voice clinical but her eyes compassionate. Most alarming is the presence of a particular compound that's typically used in pharmaceutical research. It's not something the general public should have access to, let alone be putting in food. Sophia's face paled even further. That can't be right. Mom said it was just something to cause temporary discomfort and mild symptoms. Mild symptoms? Detective Park interrupted, taking out her tablet. Like the ones your cousin experienced over the past 6 months that resulted in multiple hospitalizations? The door opened and another detective entered, holding an evidence bag. We found these in Ms. Wang's home office, he reported, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels, along with detailed notes about dosages and reactions in what appeared to be my aunt's handwriting. I felt my knees weaken as I realized the full scope of their plan. You were documenting everything, like some kind of twisted science experiment. It wasn't like that, Sophia protested, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway, always so determined. So you increased the dosages, Detective Park concluded, examining the bottles with gloved hands. Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations? The room fell silent. Aunt Margaret, still visible through the window, sank into a chair in the hallway, her head in her hands, looking suddenly older than her years. The Henderson account, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place like a horrific puzzle. It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead, and because of the inheritance clause in Grandpa's will that was triggered by my promotion. Sophia's face contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. You were ruining everything. Mom worked her entire life for this family's success, and then you show up and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead. The inheritance was supposed to go to me. Mom said she could fix it. By killing me? The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. We weren't trying to, Sophia started, but Dr. Rivera cut her off with professional authority. The concentration in the ice cream you would have consumed today, the doctor stated, looking directly at Sophia, was significantly higher than previous samples we've analyzed from Ms. Chen's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome would have been severe, potentially fatal. Detective Park turned to the other officer. We'll need a full warrant for both their homes, vehicles, and offices, and contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out how they obtained these substances. Sophia slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her face. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Mom kept saying we just needed one more try. I stepped closer to her bed, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Every time I got sick, every presentation you tried to make me miss, every client you tried to take from me, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of family does that to someone they're supposed to love? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear Aunt Margaret being read her rights as additional officers arrived. Sophia stared at her trembling hands, unable to meet my gaze, her perfectly manicured nails now chipped and broken. "Detective," I said, turning away from my cousin, my heart heavy with a mixture of betrayal and resolve, "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it felt like years stretched into eternity. I sat in the courtroom each day, my brother David beside me for support, watching as the prosecution methodically laid out their case against Aunt Margaret and Sophia. The evidence was overwhelming: the bottles from Aunt Margaret's home office, their detailed notes on each poisoning attempt, the recorded conversations and text messages discussing their plans with clinical precision. What struck me most was their demeanor throughout the proceedings. Sophia, usually so polished and confident with her designer outfits and perfect hair, looked small and defeated in her defendant's chair, her expensive clothes replaced by simple business attire. Aunt Margaret couldn't even look in my direction, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor as expert witnesses detailed the potentially lethal effects of the substances they'd been administering to me over months. Dr. Rivera's testimony was particularly damning. She presented a comprehensive analysis showing how they had gradually increased the dosages over time, demonstrating clear intent to cause increasingly serious harm. The pharmaceutical company representative confirmed that Aunt Margaret had obtained the compounds through her connection to a research foundation where she served on the board. The defendants showed a calculated, escalating pattern of behavior, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement, her voice echoing through the hushed courtroom. This wasn't just family rivalry or corporate sabotage. It was a systematic attempt to harm Ms. Chen, with a clear escalation that could have resulted in death had she consumed the final preparation. When the verdict was finally read, I felt no joy, only a hollow relief that washed over me like a cold wave. Both Aunt Margaret and Sophia were found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom: the premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, with increasing potency and calculated timing to disrupt the victim's career, demands the maximum sentence. I watched as they were led away in handcuffs, thinking about how greed, jealousy, and entitlement had twisted two people I once called family into something unrecognizable. Their social standing, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in an attempt to destroy me for daring to succeed on my own merits. 1 year after the trial, I stood at the podium of the Boston Digital Marketing Summit, preparing to give the keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on me: this was exactly the kind of opportunity Aunt Margaret and Sophia had tried so desperately to prevent me from achieving. The Henderson account, which they had been so determined to steal from me, had led to several more major clients, establishing me as one of the rising stars in digital marketing innovation. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I began, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. It's about integrity, about building genuine relationships based on trust and mutual respect. I paused, letting my words sink in, feeling their weight and truth. Sometimes the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us. But surviving those challenges makes us stronger, more resilient, and more determined to create something authentic. After my speech, several young professionals approached me seeking advice. One woman, her eyes bright with determination and ambition, asked how I'd maintained my composure throughout such a personal ordeal. I focused on what I could control, I told her, remembering the dark days and the strength I'd found within myself. I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to let fear or doubt stop me from pursuing my goals. Later that evening, I received an email from my brother David, now working at a prestigious law firm, confirming that he'd helped establish a foundation to support victims of family abuse. Attached was a donation from the Henderson client, who had just renewed their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, thinking about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't trusted my instincts that day at the garden party, if I hadn't had the courage to switch those bowls of ice cream. The local paper had run a small article that morning about Aunt Margaret and Sophia beginning their prison sentences. I didn't read it. Instead, I closed my laptop and joined my new circle of genuine friends for dinner, focusing on the proposal for my newest client project, knowing that the best revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about moving forward and succeeding despite those who tried to hold you back.